This is the Quilt Calculator homepage, and the web address is quiltnotes.com. Today we're going to look at the Chandelier Quilt. To find it, we go to Quilts, and then look at the Quilts page, and we're going to scroll down away from these ads. Down here is the Chandelier Quilt. So we'll click on that, and then scroll away from our ads again. And this is the Chandelier Quilt. It's very popular quilt because it's made from 5-inch charm squares and strips or scraps of strips from jelly rolls. And then there's background fabric. The block finishes at 8.5 inches. The blocks are set on point, and the medium to medium dark fabrics make up the accent squares, and light or low volume prints make the background squares. So let's look at these 3 different options we have. The first one, this is the original pattern where all the blocks have the same fabric. So in this red block, the 5-inch charm square is this red, and then the jelly roll scraps are parts of the whole jelly roll strip are the same fabrics. And then they're set block to block and set on point. So we'll click off that. Here is a second one because I like scrappy quilts. So if you look at the blocks here, they're all different fabrics in each block because I just like the scrappy option for myself. To me, it's kind of hard to keep track of 2 small blocks and 1 large block of the same fabric. And the third option is the scrappy block, but we've added sashing and cornerstones around each block. And the blocks, I put the same fabrics in the small squares, but you don't have to. And what happens is when you set these blocks together, you have 3 of these little beads. I'll call them beads, and then these are the charms. So there's 3 here between each one. So it just makes it a little bit bigger and puts more background between the squares. So if we go over here again, we see there's only 2 beads here between each one. So that's just a different option you can use, and this describes it. Here is the block we're going to make, and as I said, it's 8.5 inch finished. Here are the 4 patches we use. There are 2 rectangles and 2 different size squares. For rotary cutting, my recommendation is to use the Creative Grid Stripology ruler. It's very fast and accurate, and you'll be cutting a lot of strips for this quilt. For AccuQuilt cutting, you have 2 choices to cut the 5-inch squares. This die has 2 dies on the board, and this one has 1 for the 5-inch squares. This is the 2.5-inch strip cutter. If you click on any of these images, you'll see more information about the product. Now let's look at the Chandelier Quilt Calculator. But before we use this calculator, you'll have to go to the On Point Quilt Calculator to design your quilt, to make the size you need, and then find out how many blocks you need, because you'll need to put the number of blocks into the Chandelier Quilt Calculator. So if we click on the On Point Quilt Calculator, it will open a new window. So you won't have to come back to your window you just came from. This is the On Point Quilt Calculator. This is a video that shows you how to use it, so I won't go over that again. We'll just scroll down to the bottom. It all just tells you how to use this calculator. We're going to put the block finished size in here, which is 8.5. And then we're just going to design our quilt like it says in the video. And I'll put 4 blocks across and 6 blocks down. And for now, we won't put a sash or a border just to make it simple. Here is the approximate finished quilt size, 49 inches times 73 inches. Let me just put another block up here, blocks across. So now I have 5 blocks across and 6 blocks down. Now the quilt is approximately 61 by 73 inch finished. So I like that. And this tells me the number of blocks I need. So I'll need 50 chandelier blocks to make a quilt this size. It gives you the binding fabric you need. And this also gives you the side and corner setting triangles. You'll need to take this information, the number of triangles in the block size, and go to another calculator to find the fabric for that. Then this gives you the backing fabric that you'll need for the quilt. All we really need from here is the number of blocks. So let's take 50 and we'll click and go back to the Chandelier Quilt and we'll come down to use the calculator. We'll choose a piecing method. So let's say rotary cutting. And we need 50 blocks. So we'll put 50 blocks in. And then we get our fabric information for the 50 blocks, chandelier blocks. Here's the background fabric, patch A and patch C. Here's the accent fabric, patch B and patch D. Once you know how much fabric you need, you're going to cut the fabric. And you have several piecing options for this. You don't need to use pre-cuts and you don't need to really cut squares if you don't want to. So this will tell you that you can use strip piecing. We can strip piece the patch A and the patch B like this, and then subcut them into these segments. And here's what the block, when you're putting the block together, this is what you'll be strip piecing. So you can do that with A and B. Your other alternatives are you can use scrappy option. If you have leftover 5-inch charm squares, you can just count out the number you need for the quilt. And that number is up here in the quilt calculator. So here's the accent fabric, patch B. This is the 2.5-inch squares, and this is the 5-inch squares. So for the charm squares, you'll need 50 charm squares. And if you have 50 charm squares, you just count out 50 charm squares and use those in the quilt. There's no cutting. You already have the charm squares. The other option is to use partial or full 2.5-inch strips to cut the patch B 2.5-inch squares. You can just cut your 2.5-inch squares from leftover strips. You can use a layer cake or 10-inch squares to cut matching sets of patch B and patch D squares. This is the accent fabrics. One layer cake will give you 2 sets. You can use fat quarters to make scrappy or matching sets. From one fat quarter, you can get 8 sets, and then it tells you how to cut your fat quarters. If you want to go find for yourself, you can use the quilt fabric charts, how many squares calculator. So now this tells you how to piece the chandelier quilt block. For step 1, you'll take your C patches and sew them to opposite sides of the D patch, and then you'll sew these two together, or you have already strip pieced those and subcut these segments, and you'll sew one of these to the top and one of these to the bottom, and then you'll have your block. So that is the chandelier block. I didn't go into too much detail because all the information is on the website if you want to see it, and it's in the videos of the other quilt calculators. Thank you for watching.
Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos.